The kingdom of Bureau, the royal castle. Some knights chased after the princess, with the intention of not allowing either she or the king to escape. She fell to the floor but didn't let that stop her, urging her father to continue instead. But before he could even voice his disagreement, a blade swung at his neck, and in her presence, she witnessed his face go pale instantly. She tried to understand what was happening. The man standing before her, the one who'd wielded the blade that struck her father, was someone she recognized, and even knew all too well. Leaf. And now, it was her turn. Heartbroken, she could only stammer a word out, "Why?" In a fit of rage, she called him a murderer, demanding to know if he was planning to betray her family from the very beginning, and he, in return, responded with a simple question. "You're only just realizing it now?" She could still remember vividly the days she was happy. She was sickly since she was little, so there were many things she couldn't do as she wished, but her kind-hearted father raised her with great care. Since her mother and sister both passed away early, she studied desperately, wanting to repay her father's love as a princess. Although studying itself was hard, more than anything she had the second prince of Elist, Leaf Eubank. Leaf was there, and thanks to him, every day felt full and complete. Leaf was the second prince of the neighboring kingdom Elist. Amongst the Floristan region, where many small kingdoms stood side by side, her country Bureau and Elist were especially close. Compared to other nations, the Bureau had a long history, and the legend of the Saintess, now mere fairy tales elsewhere, remaining deeply rooted, still influencing politics till that day. It is the Saintess's duty to protect the country. Governing is the king's role. That was an old custom, decreeing the king must be a male, and so Leaf was to become her husband and the next king of Bureau. On this day in the past, he gave her a brooch. Excited, she showed him the ribbon he'd gifted her before and smiled at him. She expressed how much she wanted them to have the wedding soon. She told him she knew he was busy, but she got lonely. He apologized in return for keeping her waiting, however she apologized for being too selfish. She brought up how he had to learn about both his homeland and hers, two countries, and admitted it'll take some time, of course. She glazed at him lovingly as she expressed how much she wanted to become his family soon and make her father happy. She couldn't help but throw in how much her father seemed really excited about him succeeding him. He also didn't hold back, and reversed to her in the heat of that moment. For the wedding he'll give her a ruby ring, because it is the same color as her eyes. They shared a kiss as he explained that he was going to leave far away again, this time for another inspection. Moments later, someone called out to him, informing him Neil had just arrived. He teased them, remarking that they remained as close as ever. He was Leaf's right-hand man, Ed. Even knowing it was a political marriage decided by their countries, she was happy to become Leaf's wife, that she and Leaf would build Bureau together and someday support the country with their kids. She believed that with all her heart. In Leaf's country, which values austerity and strength, there are plenty soldiers, and it wasn't unusual for them to be apart for long periods due to training or deployments, so she threw herself into his arms and made him promise whenever he gets back, they'll have the wedding. She never for once doubted at all, only, now that same man now held a blade to her neck. Her voice cracked with betrayal as she demanded to know why he betrayed their country and her father, but he wasn't bothered to explain, and instead simply told her she didn't need to know that. Rather, what she needed to know was, her life rested in the palm of his hands. She asked in one breath if he was going to cut her down, and he responded saying he supposed killing his fiancée would make him look bad. In that case, he grabbed her hand and pulled off the silver ring on her finger before throwing it to the ground. Then, following the cruel tossing of the ring, he declared their engagement annulment and presented her with a choice. 1. Be executed here, or become the wife of the man who beheaded her father. Her voice trembled, a bitter laugh escaping her lips as a few words stumbled out. Do it. She grabbed the blade without a hint of fear as she ordered him to execute her, right then and there, and he agreed, until a voice suddenly yelled out for him to stop. She realized it was Ed and asked if he still had even a shred of guilt for him not to stop. Leaf, however, her refused. He explained that if the Bureau royal family disappeared and Elist absorbed that country, meaningless bloodshed will continue between Bureau and Elist. If the balance between the two nations were to collapse, then other countries wouldn't stay quiet either, so for the sake of the people, she couldn't die. Besides, as long as she was alive, she could do anything, even if it was revenge. Leaf simply scoffed. He retorted that his aide was quite interesting, daring to tell her to seek revenge on his master right in front of him. But regardless, there was no chance he'd be killed by a frail little princess like her. Meanwhile, she remained silent, reminiscing on the things that which had passed. A warm castle, a gentle father, a beloved fiancé. Her entire world was destroyed. Revenge against that man became the flame that let her live while mired in the mud. She got up and declared once again, she will become his wife. He chuckled, asking her not to forget she chose that. He pulled her into his arms, pleased with her idea of a new marriage, and took off the former wedding ring she wore on her finger. He pulled her into his mouth, his teeth digging into her skin, leaving an obvious circle mark before letting her go. Then, with a twisted expression, retorted, "You'll be needing a new ring, won't you? Take it." She held her trembling hand, shocked by such beastly behavior, although it was more confirmation that the Leaf she loved was gone, and now, she will avenge her father. She will make him regret keeping her at his side. She should have been longing for that day all along. The day of her wedding with Leaf. And yet it turned out like that. A few hours earlier, she sat alone in a dark room, her mind longing for the well-being of everyone outside the castle, her people. She pondered on how right after the rebellion, she was confined, and a whole day passed just like that. She wasn't even allowed to mourn her father, neither was she aware of what was going on outside. She'd loved her whole life inside that castle, yet that was a room she'd never seen in her entire life. Because she was sickly, even inside the castle there were so many places she was forbidden to enter. There was so much she didn't know, about the castle, about what her father had to say, and about even her fiancé. She heard the door creak open and turned around to find out it was Ed. He apologized for betraying their friendship, and she stepped forward in anger, demanding to know why he didn't stop himself if he truly felt that way. But that anger quickly quelled. She lowered her gaze as she questioned if in the beginning he'd only ever seen her as nothing more than just a tool. She didn't let him speak, and instead asked him to at least not hurt the people of that castle any further. He rushed to speak, airing his agreement and assuring her the damage was kept to a minimum, only he didn't expect her to suddenly ask if then their father was part of that minimum. However, his next words were even more shocking. To prevent any further sacrifices, he shared that he wanted her to hold the wedding with Leaf immediately. She lashes out, demanding to know if he was being serious, asking her to hold a wedding when she just lost her father. However, he remained still, noting it was necessary to put a stop to the unnecessary bloodshed, to put a stop to the conflict within the country. Leaf must become the official new king of Bureau as soon as possible. She asked if he was really saying a usurper to become king, insisting there was no way the people would allow that. In response, he simply told her that was exactly the reason why it had to be her, the princess of Bureau. She needed to announce her marriage to him to the people, as it now lied entirely in her hands the power to save her people. Upon reaching the altar, she proposes they get the act over with, quickly noting she was only marrying him for the sake of revenge for the people of Bureau. She turned to the priest and asked him to knit the kiss in exchange of rings. They no longer needed a kiss, and as for the ring, she took off her glove and showed him she'd received one the previous day. He spoke up, declaring he'll be the one to decide. Then he took her hand and slipped onto it, a ruby ring. The one he'd promised to give to her for their wedding, because it was the same color as her eyes. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, letting her resign to the thought that if that has happened back then, it would have been such a happy kiss. After the kiss, she immediately demanded to know why he couldn't wait. She explained that even if he had done nothing, Bureau would have been the country he inherited. So then why? She demanded an answer, and he instinctively reached to comfort her. However, he stopped himself, sparing her only 2 words, "Not yet." Ed appeared and informed them the people were waiting. She turned to him in confusion, not understanding what was going on. Leaf, as he pulled her, explained that they were going to greet the people as the new king and queen, and she protested. She demanded to know what he was thinking, saying just because he held the ceremony, insisting there was no way he who killed the king could face the people of Bureau. However, once the door was open, her worries appeared to be nothing more than a misplaced concern. She couldn't understand why he, the one who killed the king, was being welcomed as if he were a great ruler. The people's fervor, as if none of them knew of what he had done, made her feel as though she were completely alone in the world, and that was when she realized that it wasn't as though he had changed. The world itself had been turned upside down. A fun memory came to mind in that moment. They were happy. She'd asked Leaf what kind of wedding he wanted, and he responded saying as long as he had her, anything was fine. As long as he was there. The next time she opened her eyes, she realized she had collapsed. She managed to sit up, but she went still the minute she realized what she was wearing. The tone she had on was what the queen usually wore on her first night. And as if that was horrifying enough, the minute she turned her head, Leaf was in the room. "I believe I told the bureau staff to take care of you," he spat. "Leaving you to sleep in my room of all places. I must say my staff has excellent intuition." She let out a dazed scoff, remarking that he was speaking as though he wasn't the one who'd orchestrated the whole thing. In response, he simply asked if she believed he would spend the wedding night with her, calling sleeping with a woman who was trying to kill him a mistake only a fool would make. He leaned closer, suggesting perhaps she was now finding it difficult to kill him since he was now her husband. Without wasting time, she shattered the flower vase next to them as she demanded to know how he dared mock her. She took a sharp piece and held it to his neck, reminding him he was the one who'd murdered her father. Her hand trembled, and upon noticing it, a smile appeared on his lips. He grabbed her hand the next minute before pushing her onto the bed. His grip tightened around her wrist until she could no longer hold the pressure and dropped the glass in her hand. Afterwards, his voice came. He urged her to go ahead and burn with rage, as she liked, saying it wouldn't change the fact that she was incapable of killing him. Even more, now that she was queen, she needed to remember that the gate of her people now rested squarely on her shoulders. His gaze wandered dangerously downwards, a smirk playing on his lips. Then he got up, and as he turned away, he told her she will remain in that room for the time being. And just like that he left, leaving her feeling so pathetic. The next day, she was giving maids from Elist. The maids from Bureau had her sleep in the room he was supposed to use, thinking their relationship was still the same as it was, but to Leaf, she thought it must have been nothing more than an insult. She informed the maid serving her she wanted to see the rest of the castle, asking if she could step out for a bit, but she refused, saying they'd been giving special orders not to let her out. She persisted until the maid finally snapped. She explained that even if she wasn't watching her personally, the Ellis soldiers were patrolling every corner of the castle, so she would strongly advise her not to entertain any foolish thoughts of running away. However, that night, she slipped into a cloak. It is said that the royal family of Bureau descends from the bloodline of a saint, and that very blood was the ultimate proof of one's right to the throne. However, her father did not actually possess the blood of Bureau royals. Just like Leaf, he was a nobleman from the Scarlet family, married into the royal family to fulfill his duties as king. He married her mother, the real heir to the Bureau lineage, making him a king by marriage. So judging by that fanatical reception, she guessed the people might not actually know of what Leaf has done. So if she could just reach House Scarlet for help, then she could reveal the whole truth to the entire nation. So she slipped out of her room that night. Luckily, there weren't any soldiers in front of her room, but she wasn't that lucky with the remaining of the palace. His soldiers were everywhere. She let out a frustrated sigh, thinking if she could only find a few of Bureau guards she could ask for help. However, she didn't take notice of the vase beside her and unintentionally knocked it off of the table, drawing the attention of the guards. She searched quickly for anywhere to get out of sight, and when the soldiers finally arrived, she was gone. They tried searching around while she hid in her room, finally letting it a sign of relief once she realized they were gone. She was finally calm enough to take notice of her surroundings, and as expected, that room was also among the others she'd never visited. The castle was far larger than she imagined, so she stepped forward hoping she could get out using one of the windows when she stumbled upon something. She turned around and noticed it was a shit of armor from Bureau. She quickly went to the knight checking to see if he was okay, but once his helmet fell off, fear immediately enveloped her. Immediately she turned to run. She pressed her eyes together thinking he was going to catch her when a voice suddenly spoke asking her to keep her eyes closed. Just like that, Leaf appeared just in time. But once he'd stopped the guy, the warmth in his voice disappeared in an instant as he demanded to know if she wasn't told to stay quietly in her room. She didn't respond. Instead she asked what it was. She asked why a monster like that was wearing a Bureau armor, but that only seemed to annoy him as he yelled in response that she didn't need to know anything. He offered to escort her back to her room, asking her to be good and go to sleep. The next morning, she laid in her bed with her eyes wide open thinking of how everything was wrong. The people's attitude, that soldier as well, and more than the fact that she tried to escape. Leaf showed more anger when she asked about the soldier. She wondered what in the world was happening to the country and thought to find out first. She turned around hoping to get a little bit core rest when a maid appeared and poured a whole bowl of water onto her. She bore no remorse and only told her she'd done something foolish. She grabbed her by her hair and spat, running away the moment I told you not to. You filthy bellow woman. A sinister smile of satisfaction appeared on her lips as she thought, now then, cry miserably for me, but instead she only saw a look of defiance on her face. She bit the bottom of her lips in anger, calling her insolent as she intended to slam the bowl on her head when the other maids appeared urging her to think of what Lord Leaf would say. In anger she stormed out, asking her not to think at all that was the end. Another maid asked for the towel, but she just dismissed her, saying there was no need to give her something like that. In the end she sat alone, heartbroken with only a question echoing in her heart. Why? Why was she so hated on? However, she quickly picked herself back up. She strengthened her resolve thinking she couldn't get weak, no matter how unreasonable it got, she'd face it all on her own. Meanwhile, the maid was crashing out. She couldn't imagine that woman not even flinching in that moment. She called her such a vile bellow woman thinking because of her, Lord Leaf. Previously, he'd called her to his office reminding her he'd asked her not to let her leave her room. She tried to explain, saying that bellow woman had acted on her own. However, before she could finish, more than the fact that she may or may not have defied his orders, he cut her off, asking her not to call her that again, noting there wouldn't be a next time. He seemed to be even more angry that she'd addressed her as that Bureau woman. She questioned why Lord Leaf cared about that woman so much, about a mere below granddaughter. Lord Leaf is the jewel of Elist. He was meant to become the next king of Elistel, yet he was made to draw the short straw of ruling this tainted country, all because that woman deceived him. If only her family hadn't fallen, she thought. I could have become his wife. Lord Leaf, I came all the way here to Bala to save him. I have to free him myself. A princess of a fallen nation should quietly die along with her fallen country. Until then, I'll make sure she understands her place thoroughly. On the other hand, she sat in her room feeling suffocated. Ever since she tried to escape once, the surveillance on her has tightened, the door is locked and the maids come to check up on her frequently. And she was hungry. The harassment seemed to be getting worse, and every day, they only brought rotten food. In the past, that kind of stress, her body wouldn't have been able to handle it. Back then she was happy, but she was always at the mercy of her frail body. She considered how ironic it was that she was at her healthiest now and wondered if perhaps her anger was giving her strength. Just then, she heard the door open and the maids came in with a trolley. However, the meals on the tray were rotten. She placed a hand over her nose as she refused it. The maid from earlier noted it would be a problem if she didn't eat properly. They grabbed her mouth and brought the plate up, intending to force it down her throat while she remained stuck in the thought of how ever since she decided she wanted to know everything. Why did Leaf betray her? Why do they hate her so much? Why? She struggled so much that the plate ended up dropping to the floor. She glanced to the side to take a look at the maid, who again took that as insolent and demanded to know if she still didn't understand her position. She responded calmly, saying she didn't understand why she hated her so much and asked her to tell her. However, the maid only got annoyed. She grabbed her by her neck and spat that it was because of the filthy war her father started. She asks if she has any idea how many Alice citizens risked their life insisting that she deserved to be hated. She protested, saying there was no way her father would do such, and the maid in anger grabbed her hair and whispered that Lord Neil, Leif's younger brother, also died in that war. Because of her. The memory of Neil calling out to her came to mind, and she remained in a daze, muttering that it couldn't be true, that Neil couldn't have died. A smirk appeared on the maid's lips as she remarked that she'll give her a chance at atonement. She ordered the maids around to hold her down, and as she opened a veil, she noted that for Lord Neil and for the previous lives of earnest people, she'll pay with her life. However, just as the liquid was about to drop into her mouth, she pressed her lips together and suddenly turned her head. The maid in anger rained more insults on her. She told her she was nothing more than a useless relic now, saying Lord Leif has become the legitimate successor to that country, her existence no longer held any value, so she should just hurry up and disappear. She dug her finger into her mouth, trying her lips apart, and soon the liquid filled her mouth and a burning sensation quickly spread around her tongue. She scratched her neck as she struggled to breathe until she finally gave up. A wicked smile appeared on the maid's lips as she remarked that she was sure everyone will think the same thing. That the wicked princess have into her own fate and took her life. However, just then, a golden light appeared around the princess. She rose up in the air, glowing white. The maid shook in panic. Little green bubbles that resembled the liquid she'd swallowed earlier slowly escaped her lips, and soon she opened her eyes. The giant bubble exploded in the air, getting into the eye of the servants present, that they let out a painful scream, attracting the attention of Leif and his men. They rushed to her room without wasting time, and once Leif pushed open the door demanding to know what the commotion was all about, he noticed the maids crouching down on the floor, exclaiming that the poison had gotten into their eyes. Then his eyes drifted to Juno standing with a glowing light around her. She turned around and their eyes met, however it was nothing more than just a fleeting moment, as she soon coughed up blood and fell to the floor. His eyes drifted to the empty vial in the maid's hand. The maid from earlier questioned in her mind what was wrong with Juno, and when she finally opened her eyes she noticed Leif's foot. She turned around immediately with satisfaction, thinking he was more worried about her than that woman, but it was the exact opposite. "Tell me, what did you make her drink? If you don't answer, I will kill you myself before the poison takes her." The maid gulped down in fear before finally admitting it was Belso poison. He turned around and ordered his men to hurry with the healing magic. After confirming the king of poison, it was then he ordered them to exile the maid to the Beacon Highlands. He ordered the other maids to be thrown into the dungeon. The maid, hearing her fate, immediately reminded him that that place was filled with monsters. She noted that she'll die out there and pleased for mercy. However, he simply flashed her a soft smile as he assured her not to fret. "If you're quick, you should reach Elist on foot in about a week. Provided you're lucky, that is." On the other hand, once she regained consciousness, she immediately called out to Leif. He responded, and she, without wasting time, asked if it was really true that Neil was dead. He says yes, admitting he died in the midst of the war, king behind a 6-year-old son. Before he could say another thing, the voice of a little child suddenly called out, "Uncle?" He asked the kid to come to him, and her heart ached the more she realized how much he looked like Neil. Snapping her out of her thoughts, he suddenly announced that if she had enough free time to sneak out of the castle, then he shall give her a duty to perform. He appointed her as his guard. Should anything happen to him, a child of the royal bloodline, the responsibility will fall entirely on you. See that you serve him with your life. In a new scene, she is standing with Leif when she hears someone call her. She realizes it's Neil, and he tells her he'd run all the way there just to see his favorite sister-in-law. She praised him a little but didn't expect that little interaction to stir up jealousy within Leif, that he grabbed her all of a sudden to mark his territory. Neil only laughed it off, teasing him by asking if he still hasn't changed a bit. Those memories that warm her heart, and the ones that tear it apart, are all she had left. In the present day, Leaf warns her not to fail in that duty. She stared at him in utter silence, but her gaze quickly shifted to her surroundings. Realizing the mess, she wondered how he could let a child witness such a gruesome tragedy. She quickly shifted into a pleasant expression as she apologized for scaring him, assuring him it'll be all right. However, she didn't expect the little child to snap. He lost control of his magic as he insisted he wasn't scared and she shouldn't treat him like a baby. A few minutes later, after his anger had calmed a little, he simply rushed outside. She assured Ed she was okay and asked him to go check on the child instead. Once they were alone, she made a quiet remark. "The man I once knew, even if he despised me, would never have used a child as a pawn." He stepped forward, responding that it was unfortunate. He grabbed her by her arm and threw her onto a chair before reminding her that the man she knew was dead. A fact that, although it pained her to admit, she couldn't deny it. Averting her gaze, she asks him why he'd brought the child to that castle. He explains that the child, Colin, had been dangerously unstable since his father died, saying it would be inconvenient if he perished due to neglect. He was, after all, still of royal blood. He informed her he'll send in a replacement made before walking away. She tried to stop him, however she only coughed up more blood and ended up having to sit back down. In a new scene, she walks around the castle with her newly appointed maid. She considers silently how the poison seemed to have left her body finally, but she couldn't sleep at all because she couldn't figure out what that phenomenon was. She held her hand to her chest, thinking of how she could barely even take care of herself in that situation, so how was she supposed to care for a child? Her thoughts are interrupted with the voice of the maids calling out to Colin. Without wasting time, she went to them and asked what was going on, and they explained that the boy had locked the door with magic and shut himself inside, refusing to eat anything. A male attendant remarked that it had been days since Lord Neil had passed, yet Colin still carried on like that. A royal should be a pillar of strength for the people. He is a disgrace to the men of Elist. However, Juno shot back, noting he was still only a little child. She asks if the depth of his grief isn't proof of how much Neil loved him, and reveals afterwards that she has been instructed by Leaf to take charge of Colin's care. She asks if they can leave everything to her, explaining that instead of yelling or trying to force their way in, she planned to approach him slowly. Inside, Colin sat curled up. He couldn't help but think of how that woman, she hadn't called him weak or strange. Firstless, she tried to get him to eat, but what she got was a violent reaction. In the end, she left him a meal tray, assuring him it was okay if he didn't want to eat right now, but he might feel differently later. Once he noticed she was gone, he stepped out and his eyes quickly spotted the note, but that wasn't comforting enough for him. Instead, he bit his lips, thinking she was only just doing that because his uncle told her to. Just like his uncle, she didn't actually care about someone like him. And so, for a while she visited Colin's room at every mealtime. However, she looked around and finally a thought occurred to her. Maybe she was just pushing her feelings of loneliness onto that child. If there was one thing, it'll be better to be honest with him. She admitted that she was all alone in that castle too, which was why she wanted to be his friend, to talk to him. She apologized for forcing her feelings onto him. Her unexpected confession seemed to warm his heart a little. He got down from his bed, wondering if she perhaps was all alone just like him too. However, she suddenly heard a loud crash from his room. She called out to Colin, but all she got was silence. He'd lost control of his magic again. The attendants rushed forward and explained the situation was so dangerous, they needed to wait until it went down a little, but she didn't listen. Colin, on the other hand, could only think of his father. He confessed to him that he didn't want to be all alone anymore, that he wanted to see him, but there was no one left to save him. But just then he heard someone call him. He was pulled into a firm embrace before he heard her voice asking if she could be his friend. If they could have meals together. He couldn't stop his tears and asked that they eat with his father too. He admitted that he wanted to eat together with him more often, but now he was all alone. In response, she pulled him into an even tighter embrace as she assured him that he wasn't alone anymore. His eyes went shut and the attendants around immediately rushed to Juno. She ordered a maid to take Colin to the doctor, and when an attendant tried checking up on her, she simply assured him that she was okay and it was nothing serious. A smile of satisfaction remained on her lips as she thought of how, when she held Colin's warm body, she was thrown into the storm of intense malice. The heart she thought was lonely felt as though it loosened just a little. She pondered on how she'd thought previously for someone like herself to take care of a child, it must be irresponsible, but if she was able to be of help like that, then maybe that wasn't a mistake after all. A few days later, healthy Colin appeared in her room. He thanked her and also offered like a gentleman to have lunch with her together in the garden. Later, in the garden, Colin excitedly shares that he'd helped with the preparations too. They enjoyed tea and snacks together, and as always she drifted quickly into deep thought. Being in that place like that, as if cruel things never even happened, if only that easy how the world truly was. She didn't realize how deep she was in thought until the Colin's voice suddenly started her. He'd noticed her hand resting on her stomach and asked if her stomach was hurting, but she instead assured him she was okay. Ed appeared behind them, remarking that he loved a good tea party, and Colin immediately offered him some tea. While Colin rushed to pour him some tea, Ed took that opportunity to air his relief seeing how much Colin's complexion had improved. She agreed, even adding that he was smiling more often also, but she didn't expect Ed to suddenly mention that she'd brightened up herself too. He continued saying he might not have the right to say that, but he was relieved. She was a strong person who can support others. But that only threw her into even deeper thought. Supporting someone, cutting off the hatred, maybe it'll be okay to live for the sake of the children. Rather than revenge, living for someone else while praying for the people who died in the war, I clicked on her father and Neil. That might be the way to move forward. If she ran away, the Bureau bloodline would end and she'll reminding knowing nothing. In truth, she was already scared to face any more malice. She wanted to forget that cold sensation where it felt like she was losing even herself. But seeing Colin's warm smile, her lips curled into a gentle smile as the thought of how even Colin was able to find the courage to look forward. So she also desired to live looking forward. That night, at Leaf's private chamber, he sat gazing into the emptiness of the moonlight sky when he heard a knock his door. Immediately Juno walked in. There was a visible change in his expression, however she went straight to the point. She told him she had a request. She told him she was aware he hated her, although she wasn't aware of why he despised her to such extent, but if he couldn't forgive her for living happily, then she wants him to let her entire the priesthood as a nun. She continued, not noticing that he had gotten up, and told him since he was already the official king of Bureau she no longer served any use to him. She told him he could call her a loser all he wished, but rather than revenge, she wanted to walk a meaningful life where she could be of help to someone else. His hand struck the wall beside her as he leaned in, caging her in place. Then his voice came, menacingly low but loud enough for her to hear, like he wanted her to take in every single word in her. I won't let you leave my side. He grabbed her shoulder, and noted that she'll stay by his side for her entire life. No matter how much she suffered, no matter what she became, she will remain by his side. That's right, to make sure you never say such a thing again. Shall I cut off those legs of yours? She was terrified, but before she could understand her situation, she heard a familiar voice call out outside. Realizing it was Colin, she shoved him aside and immediately rushed to Colin. Meanwhile, Leaf simply stood in confusion, wondering what he was doing. The next morning, as the maid helped her into her clothes, she noticed the bruise on her shoulder and informed them she'll get dressed herself that day, asking them to check on Colin's situation instead. Left alone, she ran her fingers along the bruise, thinking she was already aware he wasn't the Leaf she knew, but even though it was all too strange. Getting angry when she tries to learn things, claiming she doesn't need to know. Telling her to stay by his side. He was definitely hiding something from her. Surely, something terrifying. So after all, she mustn't run away. Her revenge wasn't simply about just killing him. If she was to have him at one with his blood while she remained ignorant of everything, she would surely plunge the people into misfortune and chaos. So first she must uncover everything he has hidden. Everything else will come after that. Once she opened her door, Colin was the first one to greet her. He told her he wanted to have breakfast with her, so he's come to get her, and also, after breakfast he suggested they explore the castle together. Although she wasn't exactly sure Leaf would allow it, she thought that to be her only chance and accepted. Surprisingly, permission for the adventure was granted without any issue. It seemed as though after having ordered her to care for Colin, he could no longer confine her. She could still feel watchful eyes on them, but seeing how they were just exploring together, she thought he shouldn't have any reason to report that to Leaf. Suddenly Leaf told her he'd heard there was a room in the castle filled with mountain of books and he wanted to go see for himself. She asked if he was speaking about the archive, thinking of how she was told not to go there because dust and miasma tended to accumulate there. In her current condition, she thought it shouldn't be any problem. Her mind, however, drifted to her father. She considered how ever since that day, her physical condition has been exceptionally good and thought perhaps her father had casted a protective spell on her in the heat of the moment. They arrived at the archive and they were both taken back by the state of it. It was so clean, there wasn't even a speck of dust in sight. Colin, the sharp curious mind, quickly noticed other rooms ahead and called her attention to it. However, the one he chose didn't open. For some reason, she felt kind of drawn to the room. She didn't even know what kind of room it was to be feeling that way about. She reached for the door and it opened in an instant. Leaf praised her, calling her amazing, while she simply stared at her hand in confusion, wondering what exactly that was. It was as though her body was being controlled. Once the door was opened, Colin rushed forward in an instant. Despite having a bad feeling about the situation, she rushed after him, and once she finally caught up to him, she was even more stunned by the view ahead of them. A strange feeling arose in her chest. She tried to understand why she felt so terrified. And somehow she felt the same magical energy as back then. She strengthened her resolve, considering how she had to protect Colin, but he, rather than feeling fear, just seemed excited at the thought of a wizard hiding there. She couldn't hide her shock, and he turned to her and asked if perhaps she was scared of dark places. He took her hand and assured her it was going to be okay, as he was right beside her, promising, this time, he'll be the one to protect her. On the other, she appeared calm, like she was enjoying the every view, but inside her she just made a cruel realization: she was the only one being affected by that room. But then, could there be a reason for that? Colin called out to her, asking if she was okay and if they could go further inside, and she agreed. In truth, the thought of going further inside petrified her, but she had to find out the truth. They spotted another door ahead of them, and this time, it appeared to be something like a doctor's room. Her face went pale and her thoughts shifted. Certain pictures were appearing in her mind. A voice that said, "You've awoken, I see. Sleep now. By the time you wake up, you would have forgotten everything." She could someone remember, even though she shouldn't. She could recall the coldness of that bed. Her chest tightened, she shook, but she couldn't stop questioning who exactly it was, what that meant, or what she even did there. Again, Colin's soft voice pulls her out of her thoughts. Following his voice, he wraps his arm around her, providing her with warmth she didn't realize she needed. He assured her he was right there with her. He assured her she didn't only have him, she also had his very strong uncle, so there was nothing to be scared of. He tells her his father always said that his uncle loved her, and he even heard it himself recently. His uncle was calling out in his sleep, "June." She thanked him and hugged him even tighter. Just having him by her side made her feel at ease. Even so, a question lingered in her mind. Why does a place like this feel familiar to me? Colin suggested they get out immediately. She tried to interrupt, saying he hadn't completed his adventure, but he just pointed out how she was trembling. He asked her not to push herself and suggested they go on the adventure another time when she's feeling better. Just like that, they turned to leave. As they headed out, she realized the hallway wasn't even that long, it just felt endless for some strange reason. And just like the secret Leaf was hiding, she was supposed to be searching for clues, but it now felt like the darkness had only grown thicker. They got to a corner, the end of the creepy shelves, and she breathed in relief, thinking they could finally make it out safely after all, when something caught her eye. A name. Why is this name on something like this? She didn't hold out much after that. Like she's seen something she wasn't meant to see, she collapsed to the floor, a single question remaining in her mind. Why is Mother's name there? Colin tried getting her to snap out of it, and she herself tried getting up, at least opening her mouth to put Colin's little heart at ease, but in the end, she was carried out. In a new scene, she opens her eyes and finds herself laying bed in her room. She could recall how she collapsed on the hallway, and the question still remained in her mind, why her mother's name was on something like that. Colin didn't seem to feel anything, so maybe it had something to do with the fear she felt in that room. If she could, she'd never go near that room again. She promised Colin they'd go there together, and she decided not to run away anymore. First she was going to go apologize to Colin, then they'll decide on what day to revisit the place. She couldn't exactly say she's completely shaken off her fear, however, simply thinking of Colin gave her courage and strength. But to her surprise, once she pulled her door open, she bumped into Leaf. He simply brushed past her with a single remark, "So you've finally woken up." He continued and shared that he was glad she seemed well enough considering how she slept for 3 full days. She noticed the flowers in his hands and immediately recognized them. They were Kuon flowers, her favorite. She shifted her gaze, a light scoff escaping her lips as she thought, after all this time, how cruel you are. He asks where she is going, and she responds saying she was going to apologize to Colin since she must have scared him terribly, but he just asks her not to bother, since Colin isn't there anymore. She asks what he's talking about, and Leaf without hesitation reveals that he's sent him back to Elist. The next minute she snapped. She told him he was finally getting used to Bureau, he was finally getting his energy back, only for him to change his entire environment so soon. Leaf responded with his usual coldness, clarifying that he was only brought to warm Bureau as a temporary place to recover. So if he was feeling well enough to go poking around where he shouldn't, then he had no need to remain there anymore. She stayed silent, the thought of how she was the one being saved by Colin forming in her mind. She does think he'll even know just how much his mere presence supported her. Because he was there, she was somehow able to breathe in that cold, empty castle. Outside her thoughts, she parted her lips deliberately, letting a few words slip out. "You're always like this. You give me something, and then you take it away. You took your love for me, and now the one person in this castle who gave me any peace. In the end, you take everything away. I despise you. Anne. I despise myself as well." She held up her hands that couldn't protect anything. She wondered how powerless she could be, wondering what she could ever achieve no matter how much someone powerless like herself struggled. Now she no longer cared anymore about anything. She reached for the pair of scissors beside her, however Leaf quickly stopped her. He held up her face and stared deep into the emptiness of her ruby-red eyes and felt something twist inside him. He moved his second hand to the back of her head before leaning in to lick the tears off her cheek. Disgusted, she pulled away almost immediately, demanding to know what exactly he was doing, but he simply licked his lips. "You can cry all you want. But when you cry that miserably, it excites me. As much as it pains me to say, this is the last chapter they had uploaded. Please leave a like and subscribe, and as always feel free to comment your thoughts. Do you think he's going too far? And I'll see you guys in my next video.